Okay, the book that I chose was After Tupac and Dee Foster by Jacqueline Woodson. The book takes place from the mid-1900s, around Tupac's era, when Tupac was really famous at the time and his music was a big influence for the African-American culture. And so the story takes place in Queens, New York, about three girls who, at the end, become best friends through a game of Double Dutch. So the three girls are Nakia, the unnamed narrator, and Dee. Nakia and the narrator are best friends. They've been best friends since they were younger. They've grown up with each other. Their families have been families to each other. And the girls are close-knit. The girls are always with each other. They've grown. They have similar interests and everything. So when Dee comes into the neighborhood as a new neighbor because of her foster life, the girls are real weary about letting her in and letting her become friends with them, until they find that Dee really relates to Tupac the same way they do. They know that Dee likes Tupac's music, and they know that Dee followed along the whole time while Tupac was in the hospital, just like everybody else in the community did at the time after his shooting. The girls just found that Dee had a little bit more to herself about that they weren't understanding, but that when she heard Tupac's music and she could relate to it, that's when her story started to unravel. So Dee's story starts to unravel midway through the story, where Dee begins to tell the girls about what her life was like, from the alcoholic mother she had as a baby to being abandoned and jumping from foster home to foster home. Dee makes it known to the girls that, yeah, her life's it's not all like Tupac's, or that it's not that Tupac is the big impact for her, but that Dee relates to it because Dee goes through that same thing Tupac has been through. And that the life that he raps about and the society that he raps about and the injustice, Dee has seen it firsthand, and she has nothing more to it. The story will continue on, and Dee's life will slowly unravel to the girls. The girls finally understand Dee. Towards the end, they understand her. They understand the relation she has to the girls and why their families have become her family. Because Dee doesn't understand what a family is, because she doesn't know what family means. She just knows it's someone that gives her the house to stay under, a bed to sleep in, food to eat, and it's just those things. She doesn't understand that family means love, care, all that stuff, and that somebody's going to be there for you at the end of the day. And it's not just go eat, go sleep. It's that relationship that they build in a family. And Nakia's family finds that in Dee, and they take Dee in kind of as another child. The story ends with Dee telling the girls that her mom does want to come back, that her mom Flo wants to come back into her life, and that she's going to come and she's going to take her eventually, and they're just going to move outside of the state of New York, and they're just going to go live a whole new life. The girls understand that Dee does want that same relationship with her mother and wants her back in her life. So they support her, and they care for her a lot, and they make her known that you always have a home here in Queens, New York with us. And the story wraps up with Dee and her mom leaving the state. And Dee has no way of contacting with the girls. Like, her phone is cut off when she leaves. She doesn't write letters. She doesn't do a lot to keep in contact with the girls. But the girls know deep down that relationship they built with her was everything, and that will never go away. And Dee's always there in their heart. 3 recommendations. Before I do the recommendations, let me read a piece of the book. It says, the summer before Dee Foster's real mama came and took her away, Tupac wasn't dead yet. He'd been shot 5 times, 2 in the head, 2 down by his leg and thing, and 1 shot that went in his hand and came out the other side. It went through a vein or something. All the doctors were saying he should have died, and were bringing other doctors up to his room to show everybody what a medical miracle he was. That's what they called him, a medical miracle. Like he wasn't even a real person. Like he was just something to be looked at and turned this way and that way and poked at. Like he wasn't Tupac. Dee Foster showed up a few months before Tupac got shot. That first time, and left us the summer before he died. By the time her mama came and got her, she took one last walk out of our lives. I felt like we'd grown up and grown old and lived 100 lives in those few years that we knew her. But we hadn't really. We just gone from being 11 to being 13. 3 girls. 3 the hard way. In the end, it was just me and Nakia again. So, reasons I would tell someone to read that book is because the message behind the whole story. It's not about what you look like on the outside or what happens in your life. You can find a family anywhere, really, and the girls show her that. Another reason is the relativeness of that story. Kids that are kids, I can't think of how to say this. Children of color would really relate to that story, especially if they've gone through a lot. If they've gone through a lot, they would probably understand it a little bit more. So giving these kids that type of book would be eye-opening for them. And then the third reason I would recommend this book is because it just gives you a whole new look at what children really go through at that age. At that 11 to 13 age, it shows what it takes to have a real friend in this world. And that even though they were really young in the story, they were able to relate to someone that was popular and big at the time. And they connected with him based off his music.